Good morning. It's 120 degrees in the shade down in the desert, but up here in the Kendrick Mountain area, amid the ponderosa pines, you can find temperatures in the 80s. So I'm going to break here to talk some anime.
Claymore.
In some alternate world, not unlike Europe of the Middle Ages, in addition to the usual menaces of famine, pestilence, and war, there's a problem with Yoma, powerful demonic creatures who eat humans. In their natural form, Yoma appear as ugly, spiny-skinned, large humanoids. But a Yoma can also make themselves appear human, and even assume the identity of a human they devour. If they only munch on a few of your townfolk a week, they can hide among you for a long time. And wherever they are, it's probably best to leave them be. They're way too strong for you and the local guard to handle. To fight a Yoma, you need to get a claymore. A mysterious organization, imaginatively called the Organization, has created a hybrid race, half human, half Yoma, by grafting Yoma flesh and blood into human women. These fair-haired, silver-eyed women can draw on the strength, speed, and endurance of their Yoma half to kill Yoma using the giant two-handed broadsword that gives them their name. Assassinating Yoma is all they do. Because Claymore have a similar Yoki or life energy as the Yoma, they can recognize other Yoma even when they appear as human. Claire is one of the Claymore and the anime's central character. Like others of her kind, she wanders around the wilderness between towns, occasionally meeting with the shadowy Rubel, an organization man in an anachronistic pair of eyeglasses and fedora. Not that I would criticize anyone's choice of hat style. Rubel gives out assignments, sending Claire to towns that have hired the organization to eliminate a Yoma or two. It's a job Claire executes with cool efficiency and considerable blood splatter. Unfortunately, Claire's first mission in this anime turns into a disaster. Not for Claire, for the anime. Because while she's killing the Yoma, she also happens to save Rocky, an annoying, whiny little boy who latches on to his silver-haired rescuer like a leech. Rocky is one of those lame sidekicks who insists on helping and just gets in the way, repeatedly. It's too bad this world doesn't have a restraining order. It's not obvious what he sees in Claire. I suppose Claire is supposed to view him as an echo from her own past. The early episodes just want to introduce Yoma Slayer Claire, her stalker Rocky, and the Yoma-infested world of Claymore. We learn Claymore are incredibly quick and powerful, and that they can survive and heal from incredibly bloody wounds. There's lots of blood and guts in Claymore. Later in the show, one Claymore will find herself first missing both legs and then an arm.
Just a flesh wound.
Really? We see that a Claymore's haunting silver eyes glow golden when they draw on their Yoma power, and we learn that if they use too much of that Yoma power, they lose control of it and awaken their Yoma half. Then some other Claymores have to come out and kill them. Abruptly, with episode 5, the anime switches for a few episodes to the story of a different Claymore, Teresa. This long-haired demon slayer also has a young stalker, a mute little girl. It'll take a whole episode before we see how this is going to connect to the previous story. When we get back to Claire, the story begins to expand the cast to include many other Claymore. Not all of them the paragon of cool, dispassionate Yoma control we've seen early on. Some are obnoxious and a few are psychotic. A few wonder aloud if the organization isn't up to something other than wheel. Luckily, Claire begins to leave Rocky behind in the villages when she goes Yoma hunting with her gal pals, so we start seeing a lot less of him. Eventually she'll have to part with him completely. They just leave it as I'll find you without setting an actual place or time, like top of the Empire State Building or something like that. So there's going to be a lot of searching around later on. But I was really glad of the dozen-episode respite from Rocky. Claire and her comrades get into ever more desperate situations. Eventually we end up with a couple of dozen Claymore camped out in a northern town trying to hold off a major invasion of powerful Yoma. Combined with the snow, this has the grim atmosphere of some old World War II flicks, like Battle of the Bulge or the Band of Brothers segment in the Ardennes. Even in daylight, the sky is overcast, the scattle diffused, and the color of all the scenes a muted gray. As the story goes along, Claire learns a few new tricks with her sword and goes from a relatively weak Claymore to a fighter to be reckoned with. But eventually the story runs out of tricks for her to learn and just resorts to the old determination equals power cliche. Soon Claire all needs to do is chant her mantra, more power, and somehow Scotty cranks up the warp engine and makes her muscles bulge some more. The monsters similarly amp up their power, and whoever screams loudest wins. Claymore is directed by Hiroyuki Tanaka, who practiced splattering blood around in the Hellsing OVAs. One fault I find with his combat scenes is excessive talking. Sometimes Claymore pause in mid-battle to chat, or they just stand around and watch as one of their comrade fight when they should be helping out. It's not as pronounced and annoying as Gantz, but it still distracts. For example, in this fight from later in the series, a gaggle of Claymore has been fighting a very powerful awakened demon for some time. They finally figure they have it weakened and distracted enough for two of them to try and sneak in and finishing blows from the side. It hardly seems the moment for one of those conversations, the you don't appreciate me one.
ベロニカさん、そんな役回りですね、私たち。身を挺して相手の気を引いて。
ああ、シンシア。お互い防御型だから仕方あるまい。だが、とどめはさせるから。
留飲は下げられる。
The art offers some challenges. For a starter, we'll end up meeting almost 36 Claymore, all fair-haired, silver-eyed, athletic females in nearly identical uniforms. The character designs are mostly taken from the manga, where small differences in physique and hairstyle will have to serve to differentiate them. Telling them apart isn't easy among the secondary ranks. The anime takes time to develop a surprising number of personalities and even sketch a few backgrounds for some of the Claymore. Even a few characters who are going to get killed soon are going to get some attention. The animation is from Madhouse. I found it a bit disappointing from what the studio is capable of. There are some nice scenes. Early on, the cities have a nice, haphazard, lived-in look to them, and some of the scenes later in the woods during the snowfall work out well. And in some areas, they've used color to bleach out the scene and shift the
color palette. For example, the opening is all shot in a red. Other scenes are designed in filters of lavender, purples, browns, golds, yellows, greens, blues, or grays. I noticed the color covers of the manga were similarly monochromatic.
But in other areas, the art becomes simplistic. The background characters, such as the ubiquitous generic villagers, have a plainness and sameness to them in their clothing. For example, all the innkeepers seem to have to be bald. The animation of the sword play is initially simple. Pose, slash of light, head falls off or splits in half, and blood splurts. It's acceptable early on because the battles are meant to be very short and one-sided as we explore the world and the characters. But when they get into much longer, more complicated fights later on, the sword play is often just a blur, either to impress us with how fast these lethal ladies are with their blades, or just because it's easier than choreographing a real fight. Often we don't see the sword at all, just some metallic sparks or the blood splurting results. It's not true of all the fights. There's a nicely animated practice match in episode 10, for example, but the majority of these fights leave you feel cheated. I'm not sure if I can blame that on the animators or the director, but the final 8 episodes spend entirely too much time on combat for the animation of that combat not to matter. Claymore is based on an ongoing manga by Norihiko Yagi. Since that manga is long and still unfinished, the anime deviates from the manga to tie up a few of the story's plot threads in 26 episodes and produce at least some semblance of an ending. Unfortunately, the anime's conclusion is really unsatisfying. It includes one element we expected, telegraphed from all the way back in episode 3. It failed to deliver a decisive climax to a key conflict that I had expected and I thought we deserved, and it left plenty of loose ends. I thought the most intriguing questions the anime raised, about the hidden agenda of the organization itself, were left unanswered. Perhaps that's the price of making an anime when the manga isn't finished yet, but the anime adaptation of, say, Berserk managed to carve out a self-contained storyline. Why couldn't Claymore? They shouldn't have raised the questions they weren't planning on dealing with. Perhaps they hoped to continue with the rest of the manga's storyline in a later series or sequel. I just didn't feel the anime finished at the end, but rather with a to be continued, and it hasn't, so it's left me unsatisfied. I could have enjoyed Funimation's English dub if it wasn't for Rocky. He's voiced with a nasal whine, Todd Habercorn, who's also the ADR director, so I suppose there wasn't anyone in the booth who was telling him how he made an already annoying character completely insufferable.
Claire! Please don't do it!
But I give credit to Stephanie Young for not only giving Claire a nice deep voice, but also doing long stretches of a very harsh, gravelly voice. She must have been eating sandpaper to do that. I didn't expect high art from Claymore, just a satisfying action series like Berserk, and I was slightly disappointed that it didn't deliver an ending. I give Claymore 3.5 stars. It's taken a few interesting characters and started an interesting story, but it left the most engaging aspect of that story dangling, meaning your time might be better spent reading the manga. Funimation's released the series in North America on 6 DVDs. Each of those DVDs includes at least one episode with a commentary track, with English ADR director and voice cast. Some of the early DVDs also have some subtitled interviews with some of the Japanese creative staff. Thanks for watching.